Now, let me introduce the speaker of the day, welcome Dr. Gema Hernandez-Milian. She is a Spanish marine ecology researcher who did her MSc and her degree in Spain and moved to British Isles to continue with her career. Her research is focused on understanding the trophic role of marine top predators, fish, otters, seagulls, and marine mammals, and interactions with fisheries, both in the Atlantic and Mediterranean seas. She has been working on the implementation of such information on multi-species mass balance models to provide valuable knowledge for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. In addition, she has also investigated the trophic transfer of microplastics in marine mammals, assessing a potential technique for monitoring microplastics in biota. She is a scientific advisor of the archipelago's environment and development and has been advisor on trophic ecology and trophic transfer of microplastic for different institutions and organisms both in Europe and outside Europe. I personally know Dr. Gema for the last 10 plus years, as both of us did our PhD at University College Cork in Ireland. I still remember a day in the wet lab with Gema as I was helping her with dissecting a dolphin that was stranded in the Irish beach. So with full confidence, I can tell you she's the person you should contact if you are looking for someone with experience studying marine mammals and its interactions. So that is a brief profile of Dr. Gema. I welcome her again, and the stage is yours, Gema.
Hi, Deepak. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm gonna try to share the screen. Let's see if I can.
Yeah, I will do that.
Yeah, you need to allow me.
Yeah, did.
Okay. Okay, let's see if I'm able to do so. Yeah. Can you see now the presentation?
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Right. First of all, thank you very much for having me here. I'm really glad to be here, especially because we're celebrating the Ocean Day, so it's a really good date to talk about marine environment, in particular the sustainability. So what I'm going to present here is what we are doing now in terms of marine policy in Europe, how we are implementing the policy in order to have sustainability in our marine environment. So I will explain you what is the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. I will call it all the time Marine Strategy in order to make it simple. Then I will explain you how is the structure, which are the key concepts, going into the smallest structure like descriptors, criteria, and indicators. And in order to make it easy to understand, because it's a complex policy, we'll explain you through different projects that we are running in Spain, as an example. And of course, all these projects is nothing we are not getting output. So I will show you a few useful tools that we developed in Europe that will give us more information about the state of our marine waters. So first of all, we need to go into the history of where is starting this marine strategy. In 1996, as probably most of you know, ecosystem-based management was established in order to see how it was the balance of the diverse with the connection with the environments and all the needs that we have in the society. Then in 2003, come up the, sorry?
Continue, Gema, it's nothing. Don't worry about it.
I keep going?
Yep.
Okay. In 2003, it came up the ecosystem approach to fisheries management, where the fisheries activities come up into the management of the ecosystem, how to develop a sustainable manner for that. And based on that, in 2008, Europe established the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, but not only for the fisheries activities, but for all the anthropogenic activities occurring in sea waters. The idea was to arrive to good environmental status of our waters. So how we structure that, where we follow the golden circle. So why, what, how, in order to understand what is the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So starting for the why, as I mentioned before, the marine strategy has to be based on ecosystem approach to management. And this is done using a driving pressure welfare response, where we can state in a moment that if we have any pressure, we have more information in order to develop the measurements in order to change all the monitorings and all the things that we had to do in order to get better assessment. And this is based, this is included within what we call good environmental status. And the good environmental status is based on 11 descriptors. I will come back to this descriptor more in detail a little bit further on. So what the Marine Strategy Framework Directive try? Well, it established 7 guidelines. The first thing that he does is in the first 2 guidelines try to establish space and time of the strategy. So which regions we are working on, which is the dimension of the area, and how long we need to target all these issues in order to get a good environmental state. Secondly, we have the planning, which means setting targets and recognizing these values that are important for our seas. And thirdly, the most important thing at the end is implement these policies, trying to gather all these consensus between the different stakeholders, trying to adapt to any changes that happen and decide the best policy to apply. But how we do that? Well, the first thing is we need to have a managerial pillar. So we look for the risk assessments of the strategy. We try to treat them, and then we are auditing them, and then come back again. So this is always a cycle, a stage of program framework. So the second pillar that it is really important is to gather the information. Information means data or quality information. It means anything that is giving us knowledge about our environment. And thirdly, not less important, is the facilitating the stakeholder information, identification, and the participation of them in the different parts of the strategy. It is not the strategy only for scientific people, it's for any stakeholder that can be implicated in this good environmental status of our waters. So once we have that, going back into the first guideline, this is space and time, is going into the key concept that we have for the strategy. So it's a regional approach. What it means a regional approach? This is Europe. As you can see in different colors, we have different sub-regions. In reality, we have 3 main regions, which is the Baltic Sea, because it's an almost closed sea, it's a sub-region by itself. But then we have the Northeast Atlantic region. Northeast Atlantic region, due to their characteristics on physics, chemistry, biology, etc., it changed a lot from one area to another one. So in Europe, we had to divide it in 4 different sub-regions. But it's the same thing that happens with the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Even though they are closed seas or kind of or almost closed seas, they still have a lot of differences between them. And we had to define 5 different sub-regions. So knowing that, we then can apply the Marine Strategy Framework Directive for each sub-region. But for that, we also need to implement other legislation, other regulation, other agreements, starting from the Global Convention Biological Diversity that we had to include it within the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, to the European Union legislation. All the directives that we have in Europe has to be implemented within the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. However, as you can see, this is the map of European Union. In blue, we have the European Union. The rest of the countries are not in the European Union, even if they are Europe. With those countries, we have other agreements. For example, we have the Oslo Agreement, that is the Northeast Atlantic, where Norway, UK, and Iceland are included. So it's important for us in Europe, within the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, that we include all these regulations that we have them, because that will improve a lot our achievement to good environmental status. And it happened the same thing with the Baltic Sea. Most of the countries in the Baltic Sea are European, but we have Russia and Belarus that they are also having some waters over there, and anything that is happening in their waters is also affecting other areas. So it's important to have the agreements with them, that in this case is the outcome, included within the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. If we are going into the south of Europe, it's even more complex because we have Africa and we have Middle East. And for example, the Mediterranean Action Plan includes these countries. So that helps to have a better approach for the marine strategy. And even if we go to the Black Sea, is the same. Only quarter of the Black Sea is corresponds to European waters, while the rest of the waters are from Ukraine, Russia, Georgia, or Turkey. So it's important to include these regulations also, and take into consideration these regulations within the European strategy. So once we know all this information, how it is implemented, right? I mentioned at the very beginning that in 2008, was when it was signed, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. However, it's not until 2010 where the methodological standards are set down. And 2 years after is where we determine the targets, and which are the main target, the environmental targets to go into the good environmental states, so the Gs. And 2 years after, we start to establish the monitoring programs to target those environmental parameters for the Gs. 1 year after, we start to program all to investigate which are the programs of measures to achieve the good environmental states in order to have them into operation in 2016. The idea was that if we start to implement the monitoring programs in 2014, in 2020, we will achieve the good environmental status. However, everybody knows what's going on in the last year. Everybody's affected. So the pandemic is also affecting all our projects, and we are moving a little bit farther into this year. So it's expecting that this year we will arrive somehow to achieve for some descriptors the good environmental states. We need to see how everything is running at the moment. So I explained you before, we have 11 descriptors. Descriptors are qualitative elements, and thus describe what the environment looks like. So we divide it in biological diversity, non-indigenous species, fisheries, food web, eutrophication, the integrity of the seafloor, hydrographic conditions, contaminants in the ecosystems, contaminants in seafood, marine litter, and energy introduced, including noise. Once we have the descriptors, we have to go into what is the criteria. Okay, the criteria are technical features linked directly with descriptors, and the way that they are defined is the descriptor following the criteria. So I'm going to give you an example here in order to make it easier. We have the descriptor 11. I mentioned you before that the 11 is the introduction of energy and noise. And we have the criteria 1. So in this case, the descriptor 11 criteria 1, it's related to the levels of anthropogenic impulsive sound source do not exceed levels that affect the marine animals. So an example, it will be a 6-meter vessel that is working in an area and is producing that sound. If we go into the criteria 2, that will be the continuous low frequency sound. As an example, it will be the marine traffic, which is producing noise continuously, but a low frequency sound, and might affect different populations of marine animals. Not only marine mammals, because we always think about marine mammals, but we need to think about other animals like sharks, that they depend on electromagnetic movements and sounds and so on. So we need to think about other animals are also affected by this kind of energy. So this is why this criteria is also there. So once we have the criteria, we need to know how we measure it. So for that, we have indicators that have parameters to measure it. So indicators are measurements to be able to know where we are in the good environmental states and how we can maintain that good environmental state. So for example, here, if we go with the criteria 1, we might have, for example, the direction of sound source or the timing of the sound transmission. And if we have a look about the low frequency sound, we can have, for example, the speed vessel or even the water characteristics. So that will be an example of how we deal with the descriptor criteria and indicators. So in order to make even much easier, so I'm going to put you now the projects that we are running in Spain as an examples. So we have Mystic Seas is 3 projects that have been running from almost the very beginning in 2015 when we were on the implementation of the monitoring programs. And it was settled in the Macaronesia. As you can see here on the left-hand side, in the right-hand side, this is Europe, as I said, and the Macaronesia is the orange one on the left-hand side. Macaronesia includes Azores, Madeira, and Canarias. This is a particular area that is, it has tropical waters, it's affected by different conditions, it has a completely different type of ecosystems, are volcanic islands. So that's the reason why they have been separate from the rest of Europe, and they have been put it together because they have kind of similar characteristics and can be explored together. In particular, Madeira and Canarias are quite similar. They are quite close. Maybe Azores are the most complicated one because it's a little bit farther. It's in the middle of the Atlantic. However, they follow similar characteristics on the tropics conditions. So the first Mystic Seas was based on trying to settle the methodology for monitoring the biodiversity descriptor. So trying to put the indicators and the criteria for the descriptor 1. And the second one, it was to implement the methodology. So it was to develop the monitoring programs in order to be able to collect this data that is giving us what is important on biodiversity. And if we are arriving to the good environmental status, in particular using marine mammal data, seabird data, and sea turtles. The reason why we were using these 3 groups in particular is because they are top predators, first of all. So we have the top predators healthy. It is assumed that in somehow the ecosystem is healthy, but also because most of the people that they were working in these projects were experts in these groups. So that's also the reason on that they have a really long experience working in these groups. And the third project, it was a step forward. Once we know the biodiversity and once we know what is going on there, and there is more data available, Mystic Seas 3 was based on the descriptor 4, was trying to find out which are the better indicators to be used for the description of the food webs, because the descriptor 4 is related to food webs, trying to understand which will be the parameters to be used and the indicators to be used to achieve the good environmental states, but also trying to find out which were the linkages with other descriptors, because the descriptor 4 is getting information from different descriptors like biodiversity, non-indigenous species, for example, or fisheries, etc. So it is really important that this descriptor has to be linked with other ones in terms of the Macaronesia, but also as one of the most important things that Europe is saying, I mentioned before the transboundary regions issue. It is necessary that we link our knowledge or our research with other regions. And for example, in Mystic Seas 3, we're collaborating with the group that is working on the descriptor 4 in the peninsula, in the Iberian Peninsula and the Bay of Biscay, which is the closest one. Looking at the different indicators that they are using, we are trying to implement that. And the same thing with OSPER and ELCOM indicators. We try to use those ones that they are more widely used in order to implement in our areas, although our area is a completely different story. So going into the descriptor. So we have the project, as I mentioned. So we go to the descriptor 1. And what it tries, the descriptor 1, is to maintain the biodiversity of the biological component in a way that any anthropogenic activity is not affected that diversity, but that biodiversity. So I put you 2 examples of criteria that is being used in the Mystic Seas. One is the mortality rate of the species due to incidental bycatch. So for example, for that criteria, we will use the marine mammal seabird bycatch rate, which is also an indicator that is being used in Osborne and Elcom. So as you can see here, there is a link of everything. And the other criteria that I selected, it was the population abundance. And what we try to see is if the abundance and the distribution of the species is not adversely affect due to those pressures that the people are producing, the anthropogenic pressures. In Azores, for example, we have, well, Azores, Canary, and Madeira, we have a lot of tourists, and we need to see if that tourist is affecting them. But also we have the non-invasive species that have been introduced by human. This is still being anthropogenic pressure. So we need to see if these invasive species are affecting the abundance and distribution of seabirds, for example, especially in nesting areas. And in relation to Mystic C3, this is in earliest stage, is the most complex descriptor. So as we say in Spanish, it's indernapi, so it's really a lower stage, and it tries to put all the elements of the marine foodwebs. That's the reason why I said before that it needs the input from different descriptors, because we put all the elements, all the components of the foodwebs, and we try to keep in a good environmental state where the species abundance and the reproductive capacity is in a terms that is sustainable. I take the three of the ones that I think that they are important. One is the species composition of the trophic gills. Other is the total abundance, and the other is the productivity. And the way that we are working on that is through using ecopath models. As I say, we're in the earlier stage, so we don't really have answers right now. So we're working on that, but we were trying to have a look if there is if the changes on trophic predator trophic level, if there is any change, so there is a value or a trend where we can use as indicator, or if a biomass from a functional group, it could be used, or if there is any particular indicator like trophic web analysis in using ecopath or using other models like ECAFRA that is being used in Bay of Biscay, can be used to detect these kind of things. For example, as a visual theme with ecopath, you can see there on the bottom on the model that you have bubbles. Depending on how big are the bubbles, the biomass of the group is larger. So you can compare visually, but also you can compare by numbers. So it's a really useful tool in that way to use these models, these type of models, to for not only for science, but also for policymakers and for all the stakeholders. So that's the reason why we are using the ecopath in this case. Another example of project in the same area, this is also in the Macaronesia, is Plasmar and Plasmar Plus. Plasmar Plus, as you can see, has been running now, so we don't have really much results. But Plasmar 1 was trying to put the baseline of the marine spatial planning in the area. As you can see, it's not really a Marine Strategy Framework Directive as we see in the name, but it is, because at the end of the day, Marine Strategy Framework Directive is dealing with any anthropogenic activities. So marine spatial planning is included within the MSFD. And the second project, what we're trying is, once they have the data and the information for the marine spatial planning, they included the social and economic components. Of course, this is one of the important things when we are running models with both social and economic components have to be included. Otherwise, we are not going to have a sustainable ecosystem. And the good thing of this project is that it's linked with different descriptors. If you have a look on the top right, although it's in Spanish because it's coming from a Spanish website, well, the figures are really easy to understand. So the top left is aquaculture, middle left is offshore energy, bottom left is marine transport, right top is extractions of grain, and the bottom right is fisheries. So as you can see, that is linked to Descriptor 3 with its fisheries. Descriptor 4, of course, is food web. So at the end of the day, anything that is related to biota and so on of food webs is is the four. Descriptor 6, which is integrity of seabed, so the extraction of ground is important, and even offshore energy, and the descriptor 11, both offshore energy and maritime transport is related to. I put you the example of descriptor 3, where we are having a look that the populations exploited are in a they have a healthier stock. So this is similar to other policies that we have in Europe. So with ICES, we're following the same thing. In fact, the two first criteria for this descriptor is still being within all the regulations that we have for fisheries in Europe. So having a look at the fishing mortality rate that is in a maximum sustainable yield, the spawning stock biomass, etc. This is still being the same type of legislation that we have in Europe. So I put you an example that is come from the European Agency, Environmental Agency, that is the fisheries of the stocks of cod. And you can see there from the 1960s up to 2000, how the fishery was growing up, while the stock, spawning stock biomass was going down. You can see there a threshold. So this is important to know, which is this threshold, and this threshold is going to be one of the indicators in order to achieve this good environmental stage. So as I put there as 3 of the indicators that's been regularly used is the fish biomass or the fish maximum average size, just to make a difference from the others 2. So these indicators have been also used in other agreements that we have with other regions like OSPAR and ELCOM. And finally, the last samples are 2 projects. One of them is INDICIT 1 and INDICIT 2. The projects that I'm going to talk about, they are related to marine litter descriptors, so the descriptor 10. And the case of INDICIT 1 and 2 is based on the Mediterranean and the south-northeast Atlantic. So again, transboundary the regions, so they are 2 different regions implied in the project. The first one trying to implement which were the litter impacts on the marine as an indicators and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. So trying to see which were the main things that they were impacting our ecosystems. And the second one, once they have these indicators, they start to evaluate those indicators. In this case, the INDICIT 2 is based on sea turtles, because they are using these animals as bioindicator. This area in particular is really important as an area where we have some nesting areas, and we have a lot of strandings of sea turtles. So we have data from that, and we have a lot of recuperation centers working in the area. Mainly they are related to the entanglement of these animals and the ingestion of plastic. So they are using those animals as indicators, first of all, because they are more handling than marine mammals, for example, and they are surface animals. They are not like the seabirds, that they're going down and they can be entangled on the surface, but they can be entangled on the more on the bottom. So usually these animals, they get entangled in the middle, just close to the surface and so on. So this is one of the reasons why they are using these animals. And the other project that is related to marine litter too is the Plastic Busters MPAs. That covers all the Mediterranean area and is focused in marine protected areas. The idea is to assess the effects of marine litter in the Mediterranean seas, harmonize protocols, so put everything together, put all monitoring programs together. They are combining all the experience and trying to harmonize everything along the Mediterranean Sea, and they are covering from the sea surface to the bottom seabed, but also in biota. I'm putting this example because I was involved in this project a few years ago, and we were trying to see if we can use a non-invasive technique like this, collecting scuds as an indicator of incidence of microplastics on litter in these animals. So as you can see that, for example, in this scat, in this species, we found out a piece of net and some microplastics. So we were trying to develop this technique as one of the potential tools to use in the future. So if we go to the descriptor, as it defines in the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, what it defines is the properties and quantities of marine litter, and is not causing any harm to both the abiotic and the biotic environment. So we had different criteria. I put you these three because I'm putting you the indicators for these three. The first one is related to the marine litter. So we are talking about the litter that is over 5 millimeters, and how much and where is distributed in the coastline or the water column. For example, we can use the index of marine litter beach accumulation that we use these kind of techniques. You probably are familiar with this because it's something that is harmonized almost everywhere in the world. We also, using the descriptor 10 criteria 3, we are assessing the ingestion of macro plastics and microplastics, so large plastics and small plastics in biota. And also the projects are assessing the entanglement rate of the animals. So you have the descriptor, criteria, and the indicators. As I mentioned before, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive encourages us to produce tools or products that can be useful in the future, something that has more continuation and provide information to everybody and provide participation to other stakeholders. So I'm going to give you 3 examples. This one is the nested environmental state assessment tool. And as you can see, although it's in small letters, I'm afraid, but you can go to the DevOps project and you can click there and have a look and see how it's working and so on. It's focused on in the European water. So you can see there the main regions described it in the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. However, also include non-European regional sea. First of all, you need to think that our waters is not only European Union, but also other areas. So that helps to include other areas that are not included there. But that makes open mind to other places and even talking about, and for example, as an Atlantic or North Atlantic region instead of a small one. In fact, this tool is organized in a way that is a nested hierarchy. So you can define the different habitats, you can assign different units. So if you have a look in the software, it gives you more information about how it's working, how they link everything and so on. And you can play a little bit how this is working. Of course, this is as all this stuff is being funded by the European Union. Most of the information, it has to be public and it has to be available to anyone that is going there. Maybe you have to ask for a request because all organization wants to know where the information is going to, but you have it there, so you can always will manage to arrive at a moment that you can get the information. The second one that I think is one of the most useful one, at least the one that we use continuously, is the EMETNet, which is the observation of European Marine and Data Network. This in particular is working on the data that we are collecting, different sources, for example, in vessels, and is organized in a way that we can filter by the type of the type of material that we need. For example, if it's chemistry or it's biology or even bathymetry, whatever we need, but also by topics or even by a scale. If you're familiar with Copernicus, Copernicus is another project that has been funded by European Union. However, Copernicus has some difference from this one. This one is working mainly on data. However, Copernicus is mainly working on satellite data. So both of them are complement and they just have some links, which is really good. But this one in particular is the one that we use with data in order to implement for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, and we can use for the indicators. And the third one that I wanted to show you is a new one that it has been settled for the Mediterranean, and is a tool that is registering the impulsive noise in the Mediterranean. The interesting thing of this tool is that if you're in the Mediterranean and you have the apparatus to measure the sound, you can record it and you can upload it in the website. Of course, you're going to have experts behind seeing if the sound was correctly reported, if there are some issues or it's not useful for anything. But of course, it's a good point to have all the stakeholders providing information and being part of the Marine Strategy Framework Directive and being part of achieving the good environmental status of our waters. So just a resume of everything, right? The Marine Strategy Framework Directive is not an isolated framework. What it means? Well, we need to include regulations, legislations, which are in the European Union, but also that they are not in European Union, but they affect us in some ways. This is, for example, OSPR, this is the Habitat Directive, this is, for example, Helmand, this is, for example, Mediterranean Plan. So everything has to be included within the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. This implies that we need alliances and cooperation, not only among member states, but also with other states. So transboundary, it's important thing. And as I said, these measurements is not only a regional, but also a super-regional level, where the monitoring programs and the program of measure have to be into account this problem. I mean, that the sea doesn't have those barriers that we have in land, and everything is connected. So it's really hard to put those barriers, and many times we have to cooperate with other countries or the other regions in order to have good achievements and arrive to this good environmental state. And also important thing is that this is not an isolated stop framework. This is a continuation. This is 6-year cycle. So once we ended the first cycle, we will start the second cycle. So we need to assess again all our monitoring programs, all our program of measures. If there is any change, for example, data gaps that we haven't filled it up, but then we fill it up, then we have to change these. We have to include new indicators or new things or new corporations, etc. And is always demanding, therefore, continuously knowledge, and included not only science, but also the policy. It is really important that all the stakeholders are communicated, because that will give us into the good environmental status at the level that we require for our waters. So these are the main things on the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. I try to resume in the better way that it is possible. It's a really tough directive to understand. So I try to make it as simple as possible. I recommend to go to the Marine Strategy Framework Directive to have a look. Many of the photographs and the slides I brought in for that, and the European page, because you can have more ideas about how this is dealing and where are the projects and so on, because it's a quite complicated policy to follow. So I did my best. I hope you understand the presentation. So Deepak, the floor is yours.
Hey, Gema, thanks very much for delivering the excellent talk. And thanks to all who joined today for the talk. Before we go to discussion or the party, please provide us with your feedback about today's talk. Just going to paste that in the chat box, the feedback link. So please give to a few minutes to give your feedback to that about today's talk. And we would also like to announce, if any of you are happy to volunteer for AFS Talks, please do let us know. We are always looking to expand our coordinator network. So if you can help us circulate our talks, we would like to hear from you. Just send us an email to afstalks@gmail.com. Now let's move into the discussion part. We have 15 minutes for the discussion, and please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your questions to the speaker. If possible, please also type in your question in the chat box so everyone, including the speaker, can read and understand the question. I'll just give a few minutes for people to think and put the question here. But at the moment, maybe I will start with my own question to Gema. To start with, really, I think the whole thing about what you talked, I think it's a really good example to show other countries how important is the planning and preparation part before you actually try to implement something, which we can see in many countries, including probably in India as well. Many things you try to implement, but without having a proper planning and preparation phase. And that's something I liked from the talk. And also, I like the fact that some data is available for public, because when you come to other parts of the world, data is sensitive. Probably people don't like to share, but for a common cause, some data is available for assessment or more to see the patterns of how things are working. So having some platform for public to share data and making them available to the public to bring more science out of it, and that's something I like from the ender. I mean, ender thing. And my first question is: you talked about there are many non-EU members who are actually sharing the water, which you emphasized again towards the end of your talk. So, what level of involvement would they have? Do they have at the moment, and what level of involvement do you expect moving forward to make things working? Which is, I don't know how much involvement they have at the moment, or it's just like what stage we are actually. Yeah.
Starting for that, for example, I give you two samples of countries that I know the first hand, right? For example, Norway. Norway is not European Union. However, is following most of the policies that we have because we are sharing the waters and because we have some regional agreements, not only in fisheries, but also in other type of economical issues. At the end of the day, they're collaborating and they really understand that having a good environmental state in the waters means having a good environmental state of the close countries. So, for example, right now, and I'm talking for one group that I know that they are working on, in terms of marine litter, for example, they are trying to collaborate as much as they can with European countries and going from the Macaronesia to Norway. So they include all the Northeast Atlantic where they do the assessments. If I'm going into the Mediterranean Sea, because you mentioned before the collaboration, the sharing the knowledge, sharing the information, for North European countries is relatively easy because they have resources and they have more facilities for running the investigation, the research. However, when we go into the South European countries, and you have in particular some countries that they don't have almost anything for in terms of economic, it's really tough because funding projects that then other people are getting the records, it's really tough. So what we try is, okay, you have the funding, you do the records, we try to help you with that because we are giving you other data that you can work with. And countries like, for example, Albania is not included in the European Union yet. Albania wants to get into the European Union. So one of the things that this country is doing is trying to cooperate with the closest countries because Albania is between Italy and Greece. So its waters are the same ones that they have these countries. So they collaborate in different projects. For example, they are collaborating in marine litter, but they also collaborate in biodiversity because they are working now on the expansion and the abundance of monk seals, because monk seals are moving into its coast. So they are trying their best on that. So we start to get some collaboration.
Yeah, if I can come in, my main concern was with the southern countries, especially in the Mediterranean region, because it's not one country. There are many, and there'll be conflicts between countries, and that may, come in between when you actually try to collaborate and do things together.
Yeah, but this is the same thing that we have, for example, that's what we are including, for example, the projects or the regional convection that we have from other areas, because the RAC or the UNIP and so on, they are funding different projects in, for example, North Africa. So having those countries collaborating in that way, it's good. They are not within the Marine Strategy Framework Directive because they are not getting the funding for that, and we cannot put them into those funding. However, they have another sources of funding in order to develop something similar, indicators that they are similar to us. So if we manage to get indicators that they are suitable for different regions, and when we talk about suitable, it's not suitable only environmentally, it's also talking about economically. If an indicator is costly in terms of money, it's not going to implement. None of the Southern European countries, if they don't have money, they are not going to implement that. So we need to balance, sustainability at the end is a balance between environmental and social economic issues. And that's why social economic issues is important to include all the partners there. So we try to do our best in that way, and we try to use other indicators or similar indicators that they are using in other areas. So in that case, they can be comparable. So we don't waste neither economical resources nor personal resources or whatever resources we need to develop these kind of indicators. So that's the reason why Europe is trying to combine everything.
Yeah. Just one last question from me. What's the rationale of the 6-year? You said a new cycle start. What's the rationale about the 6-year cycle?
Well, it is assumed that the time that is needed to establish the environmental targets, the monitoring programs, and the program of measures, it will need at least 3 years. And then another 3 years in order to see more or less how it's working. So 4 years, it was not too much. If we put it longer in time, I don't think it will work. We will delay everything. So I think 6 years, it's a rational time to see some results in order to see that something is working or not. So it's just a number, just they did a risk assessment, which was the better time to implement everything from determining the targets till we achieve. And I put that because it's really hard to achieve good environmental state of the environmental waters in any descriptor. So it's really tough. It's difficult.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll go to the questions. I think I have one question here. Please explain various indicators to define healthy stock. Are there any specific models to follow? Sagar Shinde, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Okay, then the indicators for fisheries, because you're being focused in particular talking about the healthier stock, it's in fisheries. We mainly follow what ICES is giving us. So if ICES is saying that the stock biomass, the spawning stock biomass, a particular level is healthy, then we go for that. So most of the indicators in the descriptor 3 is completely linked with what ICES is working. So it's probably one of the descriptors that has more settled baseline in that way. So if a particular species, as I put in the sample of the code, if the spawning stock biomass arrives at a moment that is going low, down, and we are still fishing, it's not healthy at all. So we try to find out a threshold. And this threshold is done by assessment, a continuously assessment of the fishers captures and the spawning stock biomass of the populations. So this is what I can explain you. I'm not an expert on fisheries, so I can explain you what I know up to that level, that we use these kind of elements. So if you go to ICES websites, you will find out all the information about how to have a stock that is healthy and so on, but it's mainly based on that the productivity of the stock is still in a sustainable level. If you have a bag of fish and you remove some of the fish, you are still having the same one in the bag because it's producing the same amount that you are taking out as in a simple sample, right? So I mean, imagine that you have a bag of $5, for example, and you take out 3, but then you put it 3 another one, so you're still having $5 in the bag. If you remove 3 but you only put 1, then it's not sustainable, because you will arrive at a moment that you don't have any money. So that will be the better example to put, that whenever the spawning stock biomass maintain the population depending on the fisheries, then in theory it is healthy. That's the theory. So that's how I can explain you in a simple way.
Yes, yes. Thank you.
Srikanth have a question. Do you want to come up and speak? Srikanth? Yeah, Srikanth. Yeah, okay. Srikanth have a question in the chat box. I think you don't have a mic. So I will read it for you. Excellent presentation. Can you cite some specific indicators based on food webs in the MSFD, whether it is the whole ecosystem features or specific trophic level indicators? The food web based indicators can be better explained to policymakers and fisheries managers. Currently, we are working, she is from India, working on the food web interactions of multiple invasive fish species in freshwater and estuarine ecosystems along the west coast of India.
Right. The food webs one, as I said, is the most difficult one, because it needs information from different points of view. I mean, it's the most complex one, and it's in the earliest stage. However, there have been some advance on that. And one of the things that have been used, in particular, we are following what OSPR and ELCOM is giving us the information, and the main indicators that they are using is changes on trophic level of top predators, for example, or specific functional groups that they are key functional groups, and their biomass and abundant chains over the time. Another thing that we are using, for example, is them seeing if the size of the total length of the key predator is changing. I'm talking about fish, of course. It's changing over the time, because that will mean that there is some issues going there. But most of the indicators that we are trying to apply in the Macaronesia in particular, which I'm working right now, we don't have anything yet, because there are some things that they are not really working. We don't have thresholds. We're still saying to European Union that in Macaronesia we cannot use thresholds. We have to use trends, and even that, our models are in the first stages. So we are trying to work on that and see what is going on. But at the moment is keystone species having a look, which is the average maximum length, if there is any change over the time, if there is any change on the trophic level of specific functional groups, and if there is any change on biomass and abundance of specific functional groups. This is the main elements that we are using. Another ones going a little bit down in the trophic levels, it will be in terms of phytoplankton. And for example, in Madeira, Azores, and Canary Islands, we have different types of phytoplankton. So we try to see how it's changing this phytoplankton structure, if it's changing on type or it's changing due to different characteristics, or that they are natural characteristics, or it's changing due to anthropogenic activities. This is what we are now investigating at this stage. But of course, due to the pandemic, everything is going a little bit slowly. We should finish in February, and we had to ask for an extension of the project due to that. So we're running that now. So as soon as we have, it will be published, and you will have that information available.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. If Srikanth, if you have any follow-up question, you can type in the chat box. I will move to, if anyone else have a question, you can please unmute yourself, ask the question. Any more questions?
In any case, if anyone come up with any question in the future, I mean, I put my email there, and Deepa has my email, so anyone can contact me.
Would you like to put that in the chat box, your email address, Emma?
Yes, I can do that.
Yeah.
There is another question now in the.
Yeah, how much industry participation is there in all these activities? Industry part, yeah.
Yeah. We are working with fisheries organizations, first of all, but also we are working with communication organizations, with NGOs. Remember also that we are working not only on fisheries, but also we are working on tourists. So for example, for plastic and pollution, we need to take into account any partner, both administrations or NGOs, or even companies, that they have some part of their the implications on that. We have the shellfish, for example, organizations here in Galicia, in the northwest of Spain, that they are collaborating in plastic and marine litter, for example. Well, they are on fisheries, but they are also collaborating on that. In terms, for example, other descriptor like is contamination of seafood, of course, fisheries is interesting on that. NGOs working on seabirds and sea turtles and marine mammals are also collaborating. So we have them included in the project. So any project that is coming up is included. For example, right now has been approved, is funded a European project in terms of bycatch, and we have from the fisheries industry, where we are going to put cameras on the vessels, because it's compulsory now to put cameras in the vessels, and we are going to have observers. We are going to have some of them is coming to the lab in order to investigate the problems of the animals and so on. And in that case, it means that we are the scientific organizations, the fishery industry, the NGOs, all together working together. And of course, the administration is implied, otherwise it's impossible to get this funding. So Europe is leading right now, and fundings that is necessary to have both a lot of different stakeholders working together, and also that we communicate and we have transparency and we share our knowledge. So this is compulsory right now to get any funding from Europe. Probably that answer also your question from before, Deepak. So if we want to get this funding, we need to do that, even if we don't have resources. They facilitate us the things, but we need to do that.
So all these projects which you listed down, they are all funded by EU, or is there any nationally funded projects? Like,
we have both of the things.
Yeah,
we have both of the things. For example, right now in Spain, we have two fundings. One of them is European funding, collaborating with France and Portugal, because it's Bay of Biscay and Iberian Peninsula for cetacean bycatch. And we have another one for national funding that is putting the rest of the things that were not possible to implement with that funding is implemented with the national program. Because at the end of the day, it's the same people that is involved in the project. So we try to mix all together and try to put efforts in that way to, as I said before, try to reduce the resources, the less resources that we're using, but we are getting into the better solutions. Always is the better. So do not throw away our money. I think is the most important thing.
The Bhaskar have a question there down there. Can you give an example on how we can minimize the impact of plastic entry by government policy, if any? Is there any case study to your knowledge?
Well, that's a big issue. I mean, most of the plastic is coming from land, and we know that. It's about 80% of the plastic is coming from land. And the main problem is the management of the waste. But here, it's a complex situation. One way is that most of the bins that we have in our areas, they are not adapted for the plastic stuff getting out of the bin. I mean, we have the bins, but if any wind is coming, it just threw the things away. But even a seagull coming into the bin and is able to take it. So, for example, one of the alternatives that have been used in different countries is in these big bins, put a kind of like a rubber thing that is going like lines everywhere. So you have to put the things pushing the bag inside. So once you get it out, you're able to get out your hand out. But if an animal get into the bin, it's not possible to get out. So the animals are really smart. So if any of them get in, the rest of them, they know that they cannot get out. So they will never try it again. So this is one of the options. But the problem also that we have is when we have floods. We start to have plenty of floods everywhere. And one of the things that I noticed in Ireland, it was that and it was with numbers, because we did a small research on that the time that we have a strong rainfall, that means that we had floods. That means that more plastic it was coming into the sea. The reason of that is because when there are floods, water just scratch everything from everywhere and put it into the river, and this appears into the water. So we need to have structures that they can be settled in good conditions and they are not moved, at least with a small floods. If it's coming a really strong one, like the ones that you had the monsoons in India, of course, that's quite difficult. But if we can avoid for the normal rainfall to those litter going to the rivers, that will help at the end of the day. And the third part of this is how they are managing the dusting bin areas. So the dusting area where they put all the rubbish is always outside. It's always open air. So if there is air, this is coming outside of the area where we are having this rubbish. And animals are also interacting, and they bring the things from one place to another one. For example, birds to the nests many times, and so on. So it's a really complicated thing, and many things have to be touched. And the result is not going to be immediately. It needs step-by-step actions, one by one, and made everybody knows what we have to do, but slowly. And I don't know, it's a complex thing even in Europe. So we are still having that problem. And if you add also that European countries, at least, we are sending our rubbish to your areas, of course, that's increased a lot the problem. So in that case, I have to say that it's also our fault, because we are not recycling our items. We are throwing away another place which is far away from us.
Just to give a reflection of from the Indian perspective, we don't even have bins in many places.
I noticed that whenever you don't have bins, people throw away anything to the ground.
Well,
this is immediately.
It is also because there haven't been a culture of throwing waste into bins. You know, even if there are bins, sometimes it's of no purpose.
And it's a cultural thing. It's a matter of slowly trying to make the people understand what they have to do. It's nothing that is going to happen in 1 year. It needs generations to tell everyone how it has to work. This is not going to work from one day to another one. So it's in that case, it might be a culture thing, and it will need more time to change. So the only thing that it can be done in terms of government political thing is start then from the dustbin areas, and then start at the same time to communicate the problems, try to encourage the people putting the stuff on the bins. I'm not really sure if fines will work, to be honest, because if you have to fine everyone, it's not going to work, of course.
Well, I think one of the major problems is the population itself in India, because it's just too much crowded everywhere, and even though if there are bins, it's not enough. It's always full, and start flying from it. So yeah. So
yeah, no, it's a big problem at the end of the day. So I'm aware about the population and in that area. So
yeah.
I think it's also a big problem too.
Yeah. If anyone else have a question. Yeah, maybe that's it, I think. But if you have anything, yes, as Gema said, she has shared her email address. Please, yeah, feel free to contact Gema regarding any of these. If you have a question, and also just to remind you again, she is an expert in marine mammal studies. Yeah, so thanks everyone. Thanks, Gema, for spending your valuable time for us. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining in today. And as always, we are doing these talks every 2 weeks. So our next talk will be the next week, next Saturday. So please come back next Saturday. We will have a speaker talking on genome assembly and annotations. So if anyone is interested in bioinformatics, if you want to learn basics of sequencing, genome assembly, then that's the one you have to come. So thanks very much, and that's a wrap up. Gema, I will see you again. We'll talk. I will keep in touch.
Of course, no problems. You know that now I'm based in Spain, so now I'm not moving far away.
Yeah, in 2 weeks you'll be in YouTube.
That will be fantastic. I will be famous then.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Okay, well, nice to talk to you, and thank you very much for having me here and be part of your community. So it was really interesting. Thank you so much to you and to your team.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.